26th of October, 1942. The steel deck of the USS Enterprise trembled beneath Lieutenant Commander John Waldron's boots as he watched 6 Grumman TBF Avengers disappear into the crimson Pacific dawn. These torpedo bombers, America's newest weapon against the Imperial Japanese Navy, carried within their aluminum bellies the hope of turning a desperate war. Yet somewhere in these same waters, another aircraft had already proven itself the deadliest maritime hunter the world had ever seen, the Japanese Nakajima B5N, known to Allied forces by a name that would haunt naval commanders for years, Kate. The story of the best torpedo bomber of World War II begins not with American ingenuity or British determination, but with a revolutionary Japanese design that rewrote the rules of naval aviation. While historians often celebrate the torpedo bombers that survived the war, they sometimes overlook the aircraft that dominated its most crucial battles. The B5N Kate transformed carrier-based torpedo bombing from a suicide mission into a precision strike capability that brought the world's greatest battleships to their knees. Commander Mitsuo Fukita commanded the first wave at Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December, 1941, and among his strike force were 40 Kate torpedo bombers. These aircraft, dismissed by Western intelligence as outdated, carried specially modified Type 91 torpedoes designed to run in shallow water. As dawn broke over Oahu, these Kates executed what naval historians would later call the most successful torpedo bombing attack in history. Within 2 hours, they had crippled the United States Pacific Fleet. The Kate's superiority stemmed from innovations most Allied nations had overlooked. Its 3-man crew worked in perfect coordination: pilot, navigator, bombardier, and radio operator gunner. The aircraft's hydraulically operated landing gear retracted completely, reducing drag and increasing range to over 1,200 nautical miles. Its Nakajima Sake engine provided enough power for 1,000 horsepower output while maintaining remarkable fuel efficiency. Most critically, the Kate could carry an 1,800-pound torpedo, the heaviest payload of any carrier-based bomber in 1941. According to documentation preserved in the National Archives and Records Administration, the Kate's design philosophy emphasized reliability over complexity. While American and British torpedo bombers struggled with mechanical failures and difficult handling characteristics, the B5N proved extraordinarily forgiving to average pilots. Its low-wing monoplane configuration provided excellent stability during the critical final approach to target, when pilots flew barely 50 feet above wavetops at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour. The aircraft's combat debut had occurred years before Pearl Harbor. During Japan's campaign in China, beginning in 1937, there, Kates refined the tactics that would devastate Allied navies: coordinated hammer and Naval attacks. With bombers approaching from multiple directions to split defensive fire, unlike dive bombers that attacked from above, torpedo bombers skimmed the ocean surface, making them nearly impossible to hit with conventional anti-aircraft guns until the final seconds. By mid-1942, the Kate had participated in every major Japanese naval victory: Pearl Harbor, the destruction of HMS Prince of Wales and Repulse, the devastation of Darwin, Australia, and the crushing defeats inflicted on Allied forces in the Indian Ocean. Its success rate against capital ships exceeded 70%, a figure unmatched by any torpedo bomber on either side. 4th of June, 1942. Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga circled his Kate bomber over the Japanese carrier Hiryu. Fuel gauges reading dangerously low after the morning strike on Midway Island. Below him, the mobile force that had dominated the Pacific for 6 months was burning. The American carriers Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet had launched a desperate counterattack, and now 3 of Japan's 4 carriers, Kagi, Kaga, and Soria, blazed like funeral pyres on the turquoise water. The Battle of Midway marked both the Kate's greatest triumph and the beginning of its decline. That morning, Kate torpedo bombers from all 4 Japanese carriers had hammered Midway's defenses, demonstrating once again their precision and reliability. Yet the battle also exposed the aircraft's vulnerability when stripped of fighter protection, caught by determined interceptors. The American torpedo bomber squadrons at Midway flying Douglas TBD Devastators and the newer Grumman TBF Avengers suffered catastrophic losses. Torpedo Squadron 8, led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, was annihilated. All 15 Devastators shot down without scoring a single hit. The massacre seemed to prove Japan's tactical and technological superiority. Yet these suicidal American attacks, pressing home despite hopeless odds, pulled Japanese combat air patrol fighters down to wavetop height, leaving the fleet exposed to dive bombers striking from above. The Kate's design reflected Japan's pre-war strategic thinking. Long-range carrier strikes against enemy fleets in decisive battles. The aircraft excelled at this mission. Its range allowed Japanese carriers to strike first, often catching enemies before they could launch. The Type 91 torpedo, constantly refined throughout the 1930s, ran straight and true, with a sophisticated depth-keeping mechanism that outperformed American torpedoes until late 1943. Historical records from the Naval History and Heritage Command reveal that Kate pilots underwent intensive training, spending months perfecting the difficult art of torpedo attack. The final approach required nerves of steel, maintain precise altitude of 60 to 100 feet, reduce speed to exactly 170 miles per hour, identify the optimal release point, accounting for target speed and angle, and maintain steady course for several seconds after release all, while enemy anti-aircraft fire created a steel curtain around the target. Lieutenant Commander Shikaro Murata, who led the torpedo bombers at Pearl Harbor, exemplified the Kate pilot's skill. On that infamous December morning, he personally selected the release points for his squadron, demonstrating the tactical judgment that made Japanese torpedo attacks so devastating. Murata died at Midway, his Kate shot down during the afternoon counterstrike that damaged the Yorktown. But his legacy influenced Japanese naval aviation throughout the war. The Kate's three-man crew configuration proved superior to the two-man crews common in Allied torpedo bombers. The dedicated navigator bombardier could focus entirely on calculating the complex trigonometry required for successful torpedo attacks, while the pilot concentrated on flying the aircraft through defensive fire. The radio operator maintained communication with the strike coordinator and operated the flexible rear-facing machine gun, though this 7.7mm weapon provided little defense against determined fighter attacks. By late 1942, the Kate faced increasingly capable opposition. American fighter tactics improved dramatically, and new aircraft like the Grumman F6F Hellcat possessed the speed and firepower to intercept torpedo bombers before they reached release points. The Kate's maximum speed of barely 235 miles per hour, adequate in 1941, became a fatal liability against fighters capable of exceeding 400 miles per hour. Yet the aircraft continued serving with distinction. At the Battle of Santa Cruz in October 1942, Kates from the carriers Junyo and Shokaku damaged the Enterprise in Horton, 24th of August, 1942. Ensign Harold Swede Larson wrestled his Grumman TBF Avenger through a curtain of Japanese anti-aircraft fire over the eastern Solomons, the big torpedo bomber shuddering with each near miss. Behind him, radio man Leo Burse called out fighter positions, while turret gunner Jay Manning traversed his .50 caliber machine gun, searching for threats. The Avenger, America's answer to the Kate, was finally entering combat in numbers large enough to matter. The Grumman TBF Avenger represented American industrial might translated into aircraft form. Where the Kate emphasized range and elegance, the Avenger prioritized survivability and firepower. Its Wright R2-620 Cyclone engine generated 1,700 horsepower, nearly double the Kate's output. This power enabled the Avenger to carry a 2,000-pound torpedo or for 500-pound bombs, while maintaining a cruising speed approaching 250 miles per hour. Grumman's design philosophy drew lessons from early war disasters. The company's engineers studied combat reports from Pearl Harbor, the Coral Sea, and Midway, identifying features that kept crews alive. The Avenger incorporated self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plating around the cockpit, and redundant control systems. Where a single hit might doom a Kate, Avengers routinely returned to their carriers with damage that should have been fatal. The aircraft's defensive armament vastly exceeded the Kate's single light machine gun, a Browning .50 caliber machine gun fired forward from the starboard wing root, while another .50 caliber gun sat in a powered dorsal turret, the first electrically operated turret on a carrier aircraft. A ventral position housed a .30 caliber machine gun for defense against attacks from below. This firepower made Avenger formations dangerous to intercept, forcing Japanese fighters to approach cautiously. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron's tragic squadron at Midway had included 6 new Avengers alongside the obsolete Devastators. 5 of the 6 Avengers were shot down, but one piloted by Ensign Albert Kyle Ernest survived, despite sustaining multiple hits, a hydraulic failure, and the loss of his turret gunner. The heavily damaged Avenger limped back to Midway, demonstrating the ruggedness that would become the type's hallmark. Documentation from the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum indicates that Grumman began developing the Avenger in 1940, anticipating the Navy's need for a Devastator replacement. The prototype flew on the 1st of August 1941, 4 months before Pearl Harbor. The Navy, recognizing the aircraft's potential, ordered production immediately. By mid-1942, Avengers were flowing from Grumman's Bethpage, New York, factory at increasing rates. The Avenger's cockpit layout reflected lessons from combat. The pilot sat high, providing excellent visibility for the low-altitude approaches torpedo bombing demanded. The bombardier occupied a position in the lower fuselage with a sophisticated Norden bomb sight for level bombing attacks, plus dedicated controls for torpedo release. The radio mangunner's position included comprehensive communication equipment and easy access to the dorsal turret. Yet the Avenger initially struggled with the same problem plaguing all American torpedo bombers: defective torpedoes. The Mark 13 torpedo suffered from multiple design flaws, and it ran erratically, often porpoising at the surface or diving too deep. Its magnetic detonator frequently failed, or worse, exploded prematurely. Many Avenger crews executed perfect attacks only to watch their torpedoes run beneath targets without detonating. This problem persisted through 1943, despite increasing complaints from fleet commanders, according to historical analyses. The Bureau of Ordnance's stubborn refusal to acknowledge the torpedo's defects cost the Navy numerous victories and many lives. Only after Admiral Chester Nimitz personally intervened did the Bureau implement necessary modifications. By mid-1944, the Mark 13 finally became reliable. Meanwhile, Avenger crews adapted their tactics. Lieutenant Commander James Ramage pioneered the Anvil formation at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, coordinating torpedo and dive bomber attacks to overwhelm Japanese defenses. 17th of July, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Roy Baker Faulkner pushed his Fairey Barracuda into a steep dive above the Norwegian fjord, where the German battleship Tirpitz lay hidden. Around him, 40 additional Barracudas from HMS, Formidable, Furious, and Indefatigable, plunged toward the massive warship, each aircraft carrying either a 1,600-pound armor-piercing bomb or a torpedo. The British Fleet Air Arm's ungainly torpedo bomber was about to demonstrate that unconventional designs could achieve remarkable results. The Fairey Barracuda arrived late to the torpedo bomber war, making its combat debut in September 1943 during operations against German shipping off Norway. British observers had studied both the Japanese Kate and American Avenger, incorporating features from each while adding uniquely British innovations. The result was an aircraft that looked like it shouldn't fly and proved devastatingly effective. The Barracuda's most distinctive feature was its high-mounted wing with enormous Fairey Youngman flaps that could extend nearly 90 degrees. These flaps transformed the aircraft into an effective dive bomber, allowing steep attack angles impossible for conventional torpedo bombers. This versatility made the Barracuda valuable in European waters, where weather often precluded torpedo attacks but dive bombing remained feasible. Unlike the streamlined Kate or rugged Avenger, the Barracuda appeared ungainly, with its greenhouse canopy, long nose, and gangly landing gear. Fleet Air Arm crews initially viewed the aircraft with suspicion, yet in combat, the Barracuda's unusual design proved advantageous. The high wing position provided excellent visibility for the crew, while the powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same engine that powered the Spitfire, gave adequate performance despite the aircraft's considerable weight. The Royal Navy's torpedo bombing doctrine differed significantly from American and Japanese approaches. British carriers operated in the confined waters of the North Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Norwegian Sea, where engagement ranges were shorter and weather conditions more challenging. The Barracuda's ability to function as both torpedo bomber and dive bomber suited these conditions perfectly. Operation Tungsten, the attack on Tirpitz in April 1944, showcased the Barracuda's capabilities. Historical records from the Fleet Air Arm Museum document how 42 Barracudas struck the battleship in her heavily defended anchorage, achieving complete surprise. The attack damaged Tirpitz so severely that she remained non-operational for months. Neutralizing Germany's most dangerous surface raider, the Barracuda carried a crew of 3 like the Kate, but arranged them differently. The pilot sat beneath the distinctive framed canopy, with the observer-navigator immediately behind and slightly lower. The telegraphist air gunner occupied a rear-facing position with a flexible Vickers K machine gun. This arrangement facilitated communication and coordination during complex attacks. British torpedo bombers faced different challenges than their Pacific counterparts. German flak defenses were arguably the world's most sophisticated, employing radar-directed fire control and dense curtains of 37mm and 88mm shells. The relatively slow Barracuda maximum speed approximately 230 miles per hour. It required careful tactical planning to survive these defenses. Lieutenant Commander Baker Faulkner developed the ramrod attack technique, coordinating Barracudas with Corsair and Hellcat fighters in carefully timed strikes. Fighters would suppress flak positions immediately before the Barracudas reached release points, providing precious seconds of reduced defensive fire. This coordination demanded precise navigation and timing in conditions where visibility might be measured in hundreds of yards. The Barracuda equipped numerous Fleet Air Arms squadrons throughout 1944 and 1945, participating in operations from Norway to the Pacific. When British carriers joined the American offensive against Japan in 1945, Barracudas struck targets in Sumatra, Burma, and eventually the Japanese home islands. Yet the aircraft never achieved the Kate's elegant lethality or the Avenger's robust dependability. 4th of June, 1942, morning. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron glanced back at the 14 other Douglas TBD Devastators of Torpedo Squadron 8 strung out behind him, their fabric-covered fuselages glinting in the early light. Below, the Japanese Mobile Force steamed northward, 4 carriers surrounded by screening vessels. Waldron knew his obsolete aircraft had virtually no chance of survival, yet he pressed on, leading his men toward immortality. The Douglas TBD Devastator represents one of aviation's cruelest ironies, an innovative aircraft rendered obsolete almost before it entered service, yet forced to fight the war's most critical battles. When it debuted in 1937, the Devastator was revolutionary, the U.S. Navy's first all-metal monoplane. First aircraft with fully retractable landing gear, first with hydraulically folding wings, and first with a crew completely enclosed in a canopy. It was obsolete by 1941. The Devastator's maximum speed of 206 miles per hour seemed adequate when designers at Douglas Aircraft Company began work in the early 1930s. By 1942, its glacial pace made Devastators easy prey for Japanese Zero fighters capable of exceeding 330 miles per hour. The aircraft's defensive armament consisted of a single forward-firing 30-caliber machine gun and one flexible 30-caliber gun operated by the radio man hopelessly inadequate against determined fighter attacks. Engineering documents from the San Diego Air and Space Museum reveal that Douglas incorporated cutting-edge technology into the Devastator. Its NACA cowling reduced drag around the Pratt & Whitney R1800 twin Wasp engine. The hydraulic wing-folding mechanism was a marvel of mechanical engineering, allowing the aircraft to fit on crowded carrier hangar decks. The semi-retractable landing gear represented a compromise between weight and aerodynamic efficiency. Yet by the time Japan struck Pearl Harbor, the Navy knew the Devastator was death trap. Plans for the Avenger replacement were well advanced, but production couldn't match demand. Through the desperate months of early 1942, Devastator squadrons bore the burden of America's carrier offensive, suffering appalling casualties. Torpedo Squadron 8's fate at Midway epitomized the Devastator's tragic obsolescence. Waldron led his 15 aircraft against the Japanese fleet without fighter escort. Zero fighters fell on the slow, unarmored Devastators like wolves on sheep. Within minutes, every aircraft was shot down. 29 of 30 airmen died. Ensign George Gay, the sole survivor, watched the battle while floating in the ocean, hidden beneath his seat cushion. Torpedo Squadron 6 from Enterprise lost 10 of 14 aircraft. Torpedo Squadron 3 from Yorktown lost 10 of 12. 41 Devastators launched at Midway, 35 were destroyed without scoring a single torpedo hit. The massacre shocked the Navy and cemented the Devastator's reputation as a coffin with wings. Yet dismissing the Devastator solely through the lens of Midway ignores its earlier contributions. At the Battle of the Coral Sea, in May 1942, Devastators from Lexington and Yorktown participated in history's first carrier versus carrier battle. Operating with better fighter support and against less concentrated opposition, they achieved hits on the Japanese carrier Shoho, contributing to her destruction. Devastators also struck the fleet carrier Shokaku, inflicting damage that forced her withdrawal from the upcoming Midway operation. The aircraft's design reflected pre-war American naval doctrine emphasizing coordinated attacks by torpedo bombers, dive bombers, and fighters. In theory, fighters would suppress enemy combat air patrol, dive bombers would draw defensive fire, and torpedo bombers would deliver the killing blow. This doctrine assumed relatively even technological capabilities between opponents and assumptions shattered by Japan's superior carrier aircraft in 1941, Lieutenant Commander Eugene Lindsay, leading Torpedo Squadron 6 at Midway, understood the Devastator's limitations intimately. He had advocated for their replacement throughout 1941 and early 1942. 11th of November, 1941. Captain Carlo Emanuele Buscaglia throttled back his Savoia Marchetti SM.79 Sparvero torpedo bomber as Malta's searchlights stabbed through the Mediterranean darkness. Below, a British convoy steamed toward the besieged island fortress. Italy's specialized torpedo bombing unit, the Buscaglia Group, was about to demonstrate that the Mediterranean theater produced its own deadly predator, the Savoia Marchetti SM.79 Sparvero Sparrowhawk defies easy categorization in any discussion of World War II's best torpedo bombers. Originally designed as a fast passenger transport in 1934, the three-engine aircraft's conversion to military service created an unlikely warrior. Its wood and fabric construction seemed archaic compared to all-metal contemporaries. Its distinctive humpbacked fuselage made it instantly recognizably, unmistakably Italian. Yet in the hands of skilled crews operating in the Mediterranean's unique conditions, the Sparvero achieved results comparable to any torpedo bomber in the war. Between 1940 and 1943, Italian torpedo bombers sank or damaged numerous British warships and merchant vessels, making the central Mediterranean among the war's most dangerous waters. The Sparvero's 3 Alfa Romeo radial engines provided redundancy rare in torpedo bombers. Unlike single-engine aircraft, a Sparvero could sustain damage to one engine and still return to base. This capability proved invaluable during night attacks on heavily defended convoys, where anti-aircraft fire and fighter interception remained constant threats. The aircraft's range exceeded 2,000 miles with auxiliary fuel tanks, allowing operations throughout the Mediterranean basin. According to documentation preserved in Italy's Air Force Historical Office, the Regia Aeronautica developed specialized torpedo bombing tactics that maximized the Sparvero's strengths while minimizing its vulnerabilities. Italian crews pioneered coordinated night attacks, approaching targets at wave-top height to avoid radar detection, then climbing briefly to release torpedoes from optimal altitude before diving back to the relative safety of the sea surface. Captain Buscaglia exemplified the Italian torpedo bomber pilot's skill and courage. Between 1940 and his death in August 1943, he personally led over 100 combat missions, earning Italy's highest military decorations. Particularly the technique of volo ridente, grazing flight-influenced Mediterranean air warfare doctrine on both sides. The British Mediterranean Fleet learned to respect the Sparvero's capabilities. Vice Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commanding the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean, noted in his memoirs that Italian torpedo bombers demonstrated remarkable skill and persistence. The attacks on convoy operations to Malta in 1941 and 1942 forced the Royal Navy to divert substantial resources to escort duties, resources desperately needed elsewhere. The Sparvero carried a crew of 4 or 5, depending on mission requirements: pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, bombardier, nose gunner, radio operator, and dorsal gunner. This crew arrangement reflected Italian air doctrine, emphasizing specialized roles. The bombardier occupied a prone position in the aircraft's glazed nose, providing excellent visibility for torpedo attacks. The remaining crew operated the aircraft's defensive armament 3 12.7mm machine guns, providing coverage for aft and dorsally. The aircraft's wooden construction, seemingly obsolete by 1940 standards, offered unexpected advantages. Wood was easier to repair than aluminum, especially in Mediterranean bases with limited industrial facilities. Battle damage that would ground metal aircraft could often be repaired overnight by skilled carpenters. The Sparviro's fabric covering, while vulnerable to incendiary ammunition, often allowed small-caliber rounds to pass through without catastrophic structural failure. Italian torpedo bombers achieved their most significant victory during Operation Pedestal in August 1942. This convoy, attempting to resupply Malta, represented Britain's desperate gamble to sustain the island's defense. Sparviro units, coordinating with German aircraft and Italian submarines, attacked the convoy repeatedly over several days. The aircraft carrier HMS Eagle was torpedoed and sunk, though, by submarine rather than aircraft. The Sparviro's contribution lay in its relentless pressure, forcing the convoy into defensive formations. 3rd of April, 1945. Lieutenant Werner Klatt fought his Junkers Route 8-17 through dense cloud over the Baltic Sea, hunting Soviet shipping. The Luftwaffe's adaptation of its most versatile bomber into a torpedo aircraft had come late in the out. Too late to influence outcomes, but not too late to demonstrate what might have been if Germany had prioritized anti-shipping operations earlier. Germany's approach to torpedo bombing reveals the consequences of strategic miscalculation. While Japan, Britain, and the United States developed specialized carrier-based torpedo bombers, and Italy adapted existing designs for Mediterranean combat, Germany initially dismissed torpedo aviation as secondary to land warfare. This decision would cost the Kriegsmarine opportunities to strangle Britain's maritime lifelines in the war's critical early years. The Luftwaffe possessed perhaps the war's most versatile aircraft in the Junkers Ru-88, originally designed as a fast bomber in the late 1930s. The twin-engine Ru-8 proved adaptable to roles from heavy fighter to reconnaissance aircraft, yet dedicated torpedo bomber variants didn't enter service until 1942. After Germany's strategic position had already deteriorated, the Ru-88 torpedo bomber, designated the A-17 variant, carried to BMW engines generating over 3,000 combined horsepower. This power enabled the aircraft to carry 2,000-pound torpedoes externally, providing firepower comparable to any torpedo bomber in service. The aircraft's speed exceeding 300 miles per hour in some configurations made it significantly faster than Allied torpedo bombers, improving survival chances against fighter interception. Historical records from the Bundesarchiv document that German torpedo bomber operations concentrated in northern waters, the Arctic convoys to Russia, the Baltic Sea, and coastal waters around Britain. These operations, conducted primarily by Kampfgeschwader 26 and 30, achieved notable successes despite limited resources and inadequate numbers. The German Lufttorpedo-Wehrlaunch torpedo evolved throughout the war, incorporating lessons from captured British weapons and German naval research. Early models suffered reliability problems comparable to American torpedoes, running erratically or failing to detonate. By 1943, German engineers had developed the LTF-5B, a sophisticated weapon with acoustic homing capabilities. This torpedo could track targets autonomously after launch, significantly increasing hit probability. German crews developed the Golden Comb Formation, Golden Zanji, for anti-shipping attacks. Multiple aircraft would approach from different bearings, releasing torpedoes to create a spread the target couldn't evade. This tactic required precise coordination and timing, skills German crews developed through intensive training in the Baltic. The most successful German torpedo bomber operation occurred in September 1942 during attacks on Arctic convoy PQ-18. Utitsas from Kampfgeschwader 30, coordinating with conventional bombers and submarines, sank 10 merchant vessels from the 40-ship convoy. This success demonstrated what concentrated anti-shipping operations might achieve, but came too late, and with insufficient resources to affect the war's outcome. Unlike purpose-built torpedo bombers like the Kate or Avenger, the Ru-88 retained capabilities for conventional bombing and reconnaissance. This versatility meant aircraft could be diverted to other missions as strategic priorities shifted. In practice, this flexibility undermined the development of specialized anti-shipping expertise. German torpedo bomber units never achieved the institutional knowledge or tactical refinement seen in Japanese, British, or American squadrons. The Ru-88 torpedo bomber's defensive armament far exceeded most specialized torpedo aircraft. Multiple 30mm and 20mm cannons provided coverage in all directions. making the aircraft dangerous prey for intercepting fighters. Yet this firepower came at the cost of weight and drag, reducing effective range and payload capacity. Major Bernhard Jope, commanding Kampfgeschwader 26, pioneered German torpedo bombing tactics in the Arctic. His innovations included low-altitude approaches beneath British radar coverage, coordinated attacks with reconnaissance aircraft maintaining contact with convoys, and exploitation of Arctic weather conditions. 27th of April 1952. Vice Admiral Mitsuo Fukita stood on the deck of a United States Navy destroyer, watching Grumman Avengers launch from a distant carrier. The man who had commanded the Pearl Harbor attack, now advising American forces during the Korean War, contemplated the strange reversal of fortune that had transformed enemies into allies. When asked by a young American officer which torpedo bomber had been the best, Fukita's answers surprised many. The Katentelet wasn't. Determining the best torpedo bomber of World War II requires understanding that different aircraft excelled in different contexts, at different times, under different conditions. The question has no single answer. But examining each aircraft's contributions reveals the factors that made torpedo bombers effective or obsolete. The Nakajima B5N Kate dominated the war's first 18 months through a combination of superior design, excellent pilot training, and tactical innovation. Its achievements remain unmatched. Pearl Harbor, the destruction of Prince of Wales, and Repulse, the Indian Ocean raid, Coral Sea. No other torpedo bomber influenced the war's course so dramatically in such a compressed time frame. Yet the Kate's very success illustrates the cruel mathematics of attrition warfare. By late 1942, Japan's pool of highly trained carrier pilotsmen who had spent years perfecting torpedo attack techniques was depleting rapidly. American fighters grew more capable, and American anti-aircraft fire more deadly, the Kate's moderate speed and light defensive armament, adequate in 1941, became fatal liabilities by 1943. The Grumman Avenger represents a different type of excellence, the sustainable weapon. While never achieving the Kate's elegant lethality, the Avenger compensated through ruggedness, firepower, and adaptability. More importantly, America's industrial capacity produced Avengers faster than Japan could destroy them. By war's end, over 9,700 Avengers had been built, compared to fewer than 1,200 Kates. Avenger squadrons participated in every major Pacific campaign from 1942 through 1945. The aircraft sank the Japanese battleships Yamato and Musashi, numerous carriers and cruisers, and hundreds of merchant vessels. Avengers hunted submarines, bombed shore installations, conducted reconnaissance, and even served as air ambulances. This versatility, combined with the ability to absorb punishment and return crews safely, made the Avenger indispensable. Statistical analysis from the Naval History and Heritage Command reveals telling patterns. Kate torpedo bombers achieved hit rates exceeding 60% in carefully planned attacks with fighter support and minimal opposition. In contested environments, this figure dropped below 20%. Avengers initially achieved hit rates below 15%, largely due to defective torpedoes, but by 1944 were achieving consistent hits around 30%. The British Fairey Barracuda's contribution defies simple quantification. Operating in secondary theaters against different threats, the Barracuda performed missions impossible for conventional torpedo bombers. Its dive-bombing capability proved crucial in Norwegian fjords and Mediterranean harbors, where torpedo attacks were impractical. Yet the aircraft never achieved the production numbers or widespread recognition of its American and Japanese counterparts. The Douglas Devastator's legacy remains controversial. Some historians view it as a criminally obsolete aircraft that killed brave men unnecessarily. Others note that the Devastator represented America's best available weapon during the war's most desperate period, and crews used it with incredible courage. Both perspectives contain truth. Italy's Savio Marchetti Sparviero and Germany's Junkers. Route 8 torpedo bomber represent roads not fully traveled. Both aircraft demonstrated that torpedo bombing could succeed in European waters. Yet neither nation committed sufficient resources to anti-shipping aviation. Their scattered successes hint at what might have been with different strategic priorities. The torpedo bomber's golden age lasted barely for years. From Pearl Harbor in December 1941 to the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944,